Now let's continue to discuss how may the manufacturer induce forecasting through rebate contract. Suppose the manufacturer wants to do that. In that case, the retailer will have the private demand signal, and thus the manufacturer need to offer a menu of two contracts. Okay, either this one or that one, labeled as H or L for the high type and low type retailers. Now the manufacturer must ensure four things. Okay, let's do them one by one. First is that once the retailer forecasts, the retailer will select the intended contract, some kind of IC constraints. Also, selecting the intended contract leaves the retailer a non-negative profit. Definitely you need these IC and IR constraints. However, you need something more. Because now the retailer has the option, the retailer can choose to not forecasting. Okay? So you need to make sure that the retailer will prefer forecasting to no forecasting. Also, forecasting leaves the retailer a non-negative expected profit. Okay? So these are the four things you need. And to get all of them, that's why you need this huge program. Here, let's see. You have the first two constraints to make sure that they will do truth telling after forecasting. Okay, after forecasting, the retailer sees the type. So for H type, they should prefer H to L, and for the low type, they should prefer L to H. They should choose the contract intended for them. Also, for IR constraints, here we need to make sure that they will choose something instead of go away. So these are the usual IR and IC constraints. However, you need to also make sure that doing forecasting is better than doing nothing. So this is the expected profit for the retailer to do forecasting. With probability R, she is going to choose H and H and get this profit. With probability 1 minus lambda, she is going to choose L and L. Okay? Here you don't need to worry what will happen once she does forecasting. Okay? Because we know if she observes H, she is going to select H because we have these constraints. Okay? So anyway, this must be non-negative to ensure participation. And then they also need to be greater than or equal to the case that with no forecasting. Even if the retailer does not do forecasting, he still sees these two offers. So the retailer will still be able to choose either the high contract or the low contract. Okay? We need to make sure that with forecasting, she will in expectation get more. Okay, so that's the formulation. Again, the derivation of the optimal contract is ignored, but we know it's possible or it can be done to get the optimal contracts. Okay, again, here we have very ugly conditions, and let's do some interpretations. Here, you may want to check that because we want to differentiate agents, we need to provide incentives for them to tell the truth. So before we do intuition explanations, we need to first ask, who has the incentive to lie? Here in our problem, a retailer would claim that the market is bad. Why? Because she will always tell you so that she can ask you to make a more generous contract. Okay? If you know your customer, your retailer, is facing a very good market, then you are going to ask her to pay a lot to you, right? Because you believe she is willing to accept that kind of contract. So that's why all the retailer will tell you the market is so bad and they cannot earn money, and you need to cut down the price charged from them. Okay, so we know the high type retailer has the incentive to pretend to be the low type retailer. So with that in mind, we see RH star is greater than RL star, and RL star is actually 0. Also, QH star is actually QHI, and that's greater than QL star. So why do we see this? For the high type retailer, for the optimistic one, we know an optimistic retailer prefers a high rebate and high quantity because she believes the market is going to be good, the demand is going to be high. Okay, that's why we make RL and QL small to prevent the retailer from mimicking the low type. Okay, we need to make the rebate and the quantity small enough so that the retailer, the high type retailer, does not lie to claim that she is of the low type. Okay, that's why these numbers are smaller. We again can see that we have efficiency at the top. Okay, QH is QH star is equal to QHI. We can see monotonicity. QH star is greater than QL star. And also, if you want, you may verify no rent at the bottom. The low type retailer is going to earn nothing in this case. Okay, here we can see that there is no point to offer a rebate to the low type retailer, and that means RL star is 0. Okay, why this is true? Okay, essentially that's because this retailer believes the market will be bad. So providing rebates to him is just useless. Okay? But if you provide any rebate to the low type retailer, then it's harder to prevent the high type retailer to lie to you. Okay? Because a high type retailer always prefers a higher rebate. Okay? So to differentiate them, you need to make the low type rebate as small as possible, and eventually that goes to 0. So now let's discuss whether we should induce forecasting or not, because we have found the optimal contracts to induce forecast or no forecast. We can write down the profit function, the expected profit functions for the manufacturers under forecasting or no forecasting. Okay. And we know that's going to be a function of K, the only outside parameter of us. Okay? Here, forecasting should be induced as by definition if and only if the forecasting can give you a higher expected profit. So, and then we're asking, when will this happen? Mathematically, we can verify this thing. When K is 0, we have this inequality. When K is 0, inducing forecasting is greater than or equal to inducing no forecasting. Why? From the manufacturer's perspective, the reason of not to induce no forecasting when cost is 0 is because this is too costly to do. Okay? If I want to discourage if I want to encourage no forecasting, it's too hard because there's no cost, right? So that's why when there's no cost, inducing forecasting is much easier and eventually gives a higher profit. And then we can also show that when K goes up and goes up, the results, the expected profit under forecasting will decrease. Okay, why? Because inducing forecasting becomes more and more costly, and that's why if you insist to get forecasting, your expected profit will simply decrease. On the other hand, if you always want to stick to no forecasting, then when K goes up, it's more and more easier, and then you can increase your expected profit. So combining these two observations, we know there must exist a unique threshold, let's call it KR. This is non-negative and K would be smaller, whenever K is smaller than KR, we have the forecasting to be a better option. Okay, so that means we should induce forecasting if and only if forecasting cost is low. Okay, kind of an intuitive result. Remind yourself that when we have the integrated system, we also have the same result, right? We want to do forecasting if and only if the forecasting cost is low. But here, the key difference is that this threshold and the integrated system threshold may be different. So to understand more, let's draw some graphs. The first thing we found of the impact of the forecasting cost is that the manufacturer may prefer a retailer with a high forecasting cost. Okay, this happens when the manufacturer wants to induce no forecasting. Here, this is the threshold KR. Okay, and when K is greater than KR, the retailer would and the manufacturer would induce no forecasting. And we know in this case, when K goes up, okay, it is easier and easier to do that, and the manufacturer's profit will actually increase. Okay, even though your partner becomes weaker, you get more. Something related is about the retailer's expected profit. This is even more interesting than the previous result. For myself, I sometimes prefer I myself to be weaker. Okay, this happens when we have a jump here. Okay, when my cost is 0, and then when my cost increase, my profit is here, and suddenly jumps to somewhere higher. Okay, retailers benefit from inferior forecasting technology or a higher cost. Okay, and this is because in this region, the manufacturer tries to induce forecasting, but here the manufacturer prefers no forecasting. This difference creates the gap, and then the retailer may benefit from having a higher cost. Finally, from the system's perspective, first, rebates contracts may not coordinate the supply chain because KI and KR are generally different. Okay, from this figure we can see that here this is KI and a slightly higher thing, this is KR. Yeah, so there is a region in which the system wants to have no forecast, but the retailer or the manufacturer induce forecasts. Okay, that's a mismatch. Also, from the system's perspective, it's even also possible that the system profit increases as one of the players becomes weaker. Okay? I'm not sure whether you feel surprised at this moment. We are discussing an integrated system profit, and I'm telling you that there are two parties here. Okay? They may integrate, but if they do not, then when one guy becomes weaker, they may together earn more. Okay? Imagine that you and your classmates forms a team to do homework assignments. And then when one of you becomes weaker, you may still get a higher homework grade. Okay? This is exactly the same thing. So if this result makes you feel surprising, yeah, then that's something we say that's a good story, right? We always want to write paper to find something that surprise you. We want to find something that you cannot imagine before we tell you that happens. Okay? Anyway, yeah. Here, why do we see this weird situation? It's because we are doing weird interactions, right? And eventually, one thing I want to remind you is that no one says the two players will really do this when they are facing this situation, because the rebate contract is just one way of interaction. No one says it's optimal to the manufacturer or to the system. So if they really try their best to get the best result, this increasing thing may disappear. Okay, so let's continue. So let's do a brief summary for rebates contract. If the manufacturer must use rebates contracts, then the manufacturer should not always seek out retailers with low forecasting cost. Okay, sometimes finding a weak partner is better. Okay, and here this is intuitive because it is easier for a strong partner to get information advantage, and that means as a manufacturer I become weaker. Okay, so I don't want that to happen. I want a weak partner. Also, the retailer should not blindly reduce the forecasting cost. As from the graph we see, that may also hurt the retailer itself. In practice, a manufacturer may reduce the retailer's forecasting cost. Okay, for example, the manufacturer may share the product data to the retailer, or may help the retailer to do some kind of investments. But anyway, the manufacturer should do so only when the retailer is already good at forecasting. Okay, and this is somewhat also interesting. I may somehow try to help my partner to become smarter or stronger. But from my perspective, I should do that. I should help those good partner to become better. But if I have a weak partner, I prefer them to be as weak as forever. Okay? Some kind of intuitive, non-intuitive results. And as we mentioned, all these conclusions are made when the manufacturer is restricted to rebates contracts. What about returns contracts? Do we still have those weird results? No one says that's true. Also, how about optimal contracts? Okay, if we find optimal contracts, do we still have these results? That's something we need to analyze.